we have like a little bit more time to kind of kick around stuff that we didn't get to on the main program and kind of like amplify stuff that we did alongside Johnny Mack and Liz is here. It's the Republican Hour, guys.
Amen.
How about this, huh? It's a rare time. We don't get any pushback from our Democratic friends.
We are in charge.
John and I don't always agree, so that could be fun still.
That's true. Hey, so we have a couple of clips to kind of get things started. We talked a lot about the Governor Lamont's State of the State address. We talked about some. We didn't have much time to talk about it, so we'll get more time to talk about it. Let's watch a couple of these clips from Lamont and then Vincent Candelora, a clip about the loyal opposition, guys. Punch that in.
That young mother shot twice in the head in Minneapolis. The White House called her a domestic terrorist. She reminded me of my daughter. Connecticut is protecting our schools and courthouses where people go not to break the law because they're following the law. ICE, everywhere you go uninvited, violence follows. Go home. We're keeping our Connecticut safe without you.
She didn't talk about the fact that they're creating an offshore budget account to the tune of $330 million. He's taking more volatile revenue to give out, temporary tax rebates that he's calling electric relief. There's a lot of, it's a real lackluster sort of pandering type of budget that is decimating our fiscal guardrails. He is relying on, when this budget is done, $3 billion of volatile revenue in this budget.
We talked about it on the broadcast program, and Johnny McKinney brought it up. But when I was listening to the speech, I came to the same conclusion that Johnny Mack did, is that those of us who have been around Connecticut politics, for obviously generations, when Governor Lamont was running against Joe Lieberman in the Democratic primary in 2006, he was a young man from Greenwich. If you watch those speeches, I think he was a selectman, Johnny, right?
Yeah,
he was a selectman, and he decided that he was fed up with the war in Iraq. Now here's a guy who lives in a pretty big house in Greenwich and probably sends his kids to private schools. His wife runs a hedge fund, from old money, and a moderate fiscally guy. But he couldn't wrap his mind around the war in Iraq, and that led him to basically run against Joe Lieberman, who supported the war, right? Forced a primary, and gave passionate speeches around the state of Connecticut about our involvement in Iraq and why he thought it was wrong. Now he runs for governor as a moderate, and again, getting the fiscal state back in order again, following the Malloy administrations. And there's not a lot of passion as Johnny Mack said in the breakfast show, about guardrails and fiscal responsibility and pension liability. But I think in this speech, he may have found his voice again, Johnny Mack.
I think he did on that. And, it's funny because in 2006, when he was against the Iraq War, he was kind of the canary in the coal mine. Because in 2008, we had Jim Himes beat Chris Shays, I think because of the Iraq War, and obviously Barack Obama won the Democratic primary against someone who's for it. I think this is such a divided issue, Tom. I mean, he talked about how divided the state is. I think he's kind of shocked at how crazy this whole thing is. The ICE had an office in the Minneapolis jails during the Obama administration. When Trump became president, they took them away. And I think if you really want to be not passionate about it, but just sort of realistic, there's blame to go around all over here. There's blame on the way ICE is administering some of these policies. There's blame on the mayors and governors for not helping them, which requires more ICE agents to be in there. And there's blame on these protesters who go from being peaceful protesters to aggressive criminal agitators. And nobody wants to have that honest conversation. You saw when the governor mentioned that, right, Liz? The entire Democratic side of the aisle got up and cheered. This is a hugely passionate issue for them. It's equally as passionate for Republicans. My last point is, the weird thing is that all of the public polling, New York Times, CNN asked, should we deport people here illegally? Not even the qualifier of who've committed crimes. 56% of America thinks we should deport everybody who's here illegally. When you put in the qualifier if you committed a crime, it's overwhelmingly, even a majority of Democrats.
So, Liz,
where's that disconnect?
So, Liz, is this an election issue? We all talk about pocketbook issues, and when you campaign, people want to know, are you better off today than you were tomorrow? Tomorrow, the issue of affordability is the big buzzword these days. When it comes down to it, will people will they be able to nationalize this gubernatorial race and even local elections?
Well, it certainly was an issue, a driving issue in the 24 presidential election. And I think it is a huge part of why Donald Trump won election again. I think, John, your points are excellent, and there seems to be a very short memory for Democrats in terms of what the Democrat policies on this have been in previous administrations, whether it's the Clinton administration, whether it's Hillary Clinton as a candidate or Barack Obama as a president. It was Joe Biden that put us in this situation in the first place through failures of his administration to act in the same way that the Obama administration did, and that's why we're here. I think what really frustrated Republicans on that issue in particular is the way in which the governor set it up. It was like a bait and switch. He got everybody up there standing to clap for the people who do protect our communities, our local and state law enforcement. And then he did a 1-2 punch by going after ICE agents. And the reality is, if you look at places where the governors and mayors have been antagonistic to allowing the local and state law enforcement to coordinate with federal agents, that is where there are issues. And if the governor took his own advice of allowing state and local authorities to work alongside those federal agents, then we would have safer communities. Those are the folks who know where these guys are, that they know where the bad people are. And to be honest with you, when you look at some of the turnout, even looking at the 24 election, the surge in urban votes and black and brown communities for Donald Trump, a lot of it came around the illegal immigration issue. So to your point about the politics, Tom, the long way around to that, this was the governor trying to get his base ginned up. When you look at the polling and you look, he has a deficit among Democrat voters. This was a way for him to remind those voters and the people in that room, I'm a Democrat, I'm your guy, we may disagree on fiscal policy, but I'm going to stand up here and attack ICE the same way you are and the same way you're expecting me to do. That is what Tommy, that was about.
He put a word in his speech, which maybe I'm reading way too much into because nobody's talked about it. He said, ICE, everywhere you go uninvited, violence follows. And I think someone in the press needs to press him on that question. What did you mean by uninvited? Obviously, the mayor of Minneapolis and the governor haven't invited them in.
That's a really great point.
But if there's an ICE detainer for someone coming out of New Haven jail who's here illegally, who's committed crimes, is the governor going to say, ICE, you're not invited? I'd love to hear him answer that question.
And by the way, the day before he gave the speech, there was a huge collaborative effort by the FBI and DEA and others to go after an illegal drug ring in, I believe it was New Haven.
Yep.
And so, we have to have these conversations because the reality is there's there's much story to tell on that side of it too. And the folks who are living in communities that are in these circumstances want that bad behavior, want those illegal activities to stop.
All right, guys, let's take a quick break, and then we'll get to some more issues that Governor Lamont brought up. Don't go away. Guys, hey, let's get a little bit issuey, a little bit wonky on some of the stuff that the governor did bring up in his State of the State address. Let's talk about school breakfasts. Let's roll that clip.
A lot of anxiety about food these days, SNAP benefits and the such. Let's get the kids going right. Helps a lot of the kids maybe who aren't coming back to school. One more reason to come back to school. I'm glad we're doing it. Hope the legislature supports us this year.
To universally implement this is very expensive, and I think we need to see the cost-benefit analysis. But when this was implemented during COVID, I heard a lot of pushback from schools saying a lot of this stuff is ending up in the garbage.
That's interesting. Well, and Liz, remember our friend Bermuda Zimmerman, advocate for child care. They kind of took care of that last session of the legislature.
They did.
It seems to me that this is probably an important thing for them to do there. But again, everything costs money.
Well, I think Vince's point is really, as always, it is the devil is in the details. Certainly nobody wants kids to go hungry at all, ever. And I know as a mom, you got to get your kids a good, healthy breakfast in order for them to be ready to learn for the day. And I think what we need to do is an audit and an analysis of where is there a need and who is best suited to fill that need. Is it better to provide that through nonprofits and local organizations? Are there other ways we can get these kids? Is that an opportunity, John? We talked about this as it relates to the homeschool issue. Is there a way to deal with truancy in some form? And the governor sort of mentioned that here as well, that we want to get kids into school is providing them with that breakfast another way to make sure that they get into the building and that they're sitting in the chairs to learn. So I think Vinny raises obviously some very good points about effectiveness and how are we doing this? Is it important to do it universally? Is there a need to do it universally? And if there isn't, then let's make sure that we're getting the food where the kids need it most. And I know in talking with teachers and folks in Waterbury, obviously there's a significant need there in many cases. But I think Vinny's point is not let's let kids go hungry. It's let's make sure that the kids who need the food are the ones who are getting it.
There's so much money to go around, Johnny.
Right. Well, if you look at the money he's allocated in the budget for this, I think when he uses the term universal, he's saying everybody who can afford to have breakfast and has breakfast has it, and the kids who can't are now going to have it. It's not going to be for every school kid from Greenwich to Stonington. It's going to be for the need-based kids in need-based schools. I think it's a good idea. Vinny's line about some food being thrown away is probably accurate, but because you can provide the meals for the kids, it doesn't mean they're going to eat it or like it.
Yeah, there goes the salads.
So, but I think I don't even think I didn't hear all of Vinny's remarks. I don't even think Republicans are opposed to the concept. In fact, I think they'd be very supportive as long as it's targeted to the right communities, to the right people, and it just doesn't blow up into another big, huge spending program.
We also talked about Marty Looney's push for homeschooling reform, which would probably be a real big talker when it comes to the floor of the House and the Senate. We kind of even talked during our breaks about the issue about homeschooling reform versus DCF reform, and so that is kind of where the sticky wicket is on that one, Johnny McKinney. So where do you see this landing?
I see it being very controversial, and I see a lot of the homeschooling parents coming up to the Capitol again like they always have. And they're very active. When I served, I would constantly be called and meet with and groups of homeschool parents in Fairfield and other towns. DCF is the hardest job in the world. They are going to make mistakes, and sadly, those mistakes sometimes end up in a child dying. There will be a bad homeschool parent somewhere in the world, just as there is a bad parent whose kid is going to public or private school. The focus on the homeschooling parents from Senator Looney and many of the Democrats really, I find very strange. It's such a small slice, and these parents are doing what we want parents to do. They're taking an active role in their kids' education. I just don't. I've never understood it. I don't think I ever will.
And truth be told, they probably don't fund DCF enough.
Correct.
Because there's not enough social workers. There's not enough supervisors to go to these homes. But having said that, and having been through the process, even if you are vigilant in making sure these kids are safe, you can't get them all.
Right.
And that's unfortunate.
And so that's where these circumstances sort of become a bit of a slippery slope, right? Where we're going to paint everyone with the same broad brush. And I think, John, you can agree or disagree, but this feels very reminiscent to me of the vaccine religious exemption conversation, because I remember in that conversation, what was failed to be acknowledged by the Democrats in the building largely was the fact that 30,000 kids that are in our public school system were out of compliance with our vaccine mandates in Connecticut, and instead we're focusing their efforts on on fewer than, I believe it was like 4,000 kids who had religious exemptions. And so this feels very similar to me, is we're not addressing the larger issue of kids who are truant, who are not going to school, of kids who have been in the system and are not being followed. And instead, we're having a conversation about homeschool, and that's wrong. And I'll tell you this. When every few years, when the governor's office, regardless of who it is, goes to cut schools and Catholic school buses and nurses, the Catholic school parents get up to the Capitol and they tell them, you can't do that, we're taxpayers and we deserve these. And I'll never forget, Tom, my son in kindergarten saw the governor here on an off day right after the governor's budget, and he looked at the governor and he said, don't take away my bus. You want an impassioned parent in your face? Go mess with their kid's school and how they decide they want to educate their children. And I think that Democrats are going to potentially invigorate a block of voters just generally in this electorate that may otherwise have not been as energized.
Yeah, I would think the only thing that might pass would be Senator Looney said he wants at the beginning of each school year for a parent to identify that they're going to be homeschooling. I don't think that's an outrageous request. I don't think it's where we should be spending our time focusing, but I would imagine that might be the only thing they'd be able to pass.
But I would think, just as a parent, I would think that the obligation is the other way around, right? That if you're choosing to enroll your child in a public school, that is your choice and not the other way around,
I
right?
agree.
I mean, so I think that's where I do think Democrats have already tried this and they did not like the result. And I think Jen Lieber found out the hard way what happens when you think that the way you think is the way everybody thinks. And those parents are going to be up there and they're going to have their voice heard. And Democrats may be sorry that they did this in an election year.
And as we were pointing out earlier, Tom, some of our municipalities, New Britain, Bridgeport, other places, have incredibly high truancy rates. Kids who don't show up for school 30, 40 days out of a school year. I've forgotten how many school days there are, but that's
181 for anyone counting.
That's a pretty high. That's a pretty high. That's a pretty high percentage.
I could go with a few more school days.
And I would imagine if you took the number of kids who are homeschooled versus the number of kids who reach that truancy level, the latter is greater.
And that's my point, right? It's very similar, I think, to that religious exemption. We're having the wrong conversation.
Right, guys.
But the politically correct conversation.
One more
for the
quick break.
Democrats.
One more quick break, and we'll wrap it up with more politics. Maybe talk a little Fairfield politics, guys.
Let's do it.
Let's do it. Extended after-hours coverage of the state address, guys. You know, we talked about this before about how every year we say it's the short session of the legislature, like 19 weeks. You know, can they just get in and get out and go home and campaign? But it never seems that way, and they always go right down to the wire. They're up till midnight. You know, the last couple of weeks of the session, trying to jam things through, whatever they're trying to jam through. Liz, what's the politics of this session? What do you do? How do the Republicans, which now hold the power as things go towards the end of the session, right? How do they use their extremely small minority to make political points ahead of November?
Well, I think that's an interesting point, right? Because the governor made very clear what his political priorities are, right? And I think you're going to continue to see issues related to ICE and that in particular. And I think Republicans, to your point, Tom, the way we do things in Connecticut, they really do hold the keys here. And I think there are plenty of opportunities for them to let their voices be heard, and a credit particularly to Speaker Ritter, who has a very strong working relationship with Vin Candelora that allows for Republicans to have truly substantive, informative conversations about policy. And we saw that take place on day one in the House, where Republicans put on a policy on the table that Democrats voted down that would have allowed for no tax on tips and overtime at the state level to mirror what's happened at the federal level.
Very Trumpy thing. You know?
Well, yeah. But Trump or not, the reality is Republicans know that their base is middle class, working families, and that's where they know their bread is buttered. And Democrats are now the rich elite sort of base, and they're not supporting those things. So
it's interesting. It's interesting that we talked about this during the broadcast show. Is that Johnny Mac? After the typical gaggle after the speech, Ryan Fazio got up there. Now, granted, he's running for office, and Steve Harding got up there. It was not now in your former role, and we've been doing this for a long time. That was one of the most partisan attacks that I've seen from a Republican. I couldn't think of you, Johnny Mac, going to the cameras and saying that was the most partisan speech the governor has basically given in 8 years. So it seems to me like the gloves are off. Granted, times have changed. We're like, get off my lawn, guys. This is 2026. This is not 10, 20 years ago when things were a little more genteel with no social media. Did that strike you too?
A little bit, although I think Dan Malloy would probably have a different version of what my speeches were after his
100%.
budget speeches. But I think Republicans, small in numbers, if they're together, I think they feel more emboldened to attack the governor.
Well, it seems like they are.
more than they have.
Have they seen his poll rating? Have they seen his poll ratings?
But he opened himself up for that. I mean, we talked.
He did.
I mentioned this on the opening when we talked about this on the broadcast. This was the most divisive speech, the most political speech the governor has given. So when you do that, you're going to open yourself up.
Do you think it was? If you take the ICE part out of it, do you think it was divisive?
Yeah, I don't think so.
If you take the ICE out of it, I think it was honestly probably. What did he say?
Well, no, but I mean that was the.
Yes, I think that is
And
what
I think
fired people up. If he did not do that, I don't think that their reactions would have been the same.
And I think
so
that's what
I'm
our
saying.
country's seeing.
Exactly.
Like we're seeing on social media and TV what's happening in Minneapolis, and nothing else matters. Like everybody sees everything else through that lens.
And I also wondered, we didn't talk about this on the program, but I always wondered. I watched Maura Healey's re-election speech and her State of the State speech. I watched Kathy Hochul's re-election speech and State of the State speech. It was very anti-Trump. It was very anti-ICE.
More so than Lamont's.
More so,
yeah.
Exactly. And it was like red meat to the base. And it's almost like he finally woke up one day and said,
I'm a Democrat.
Everyone around me, I'm a Democrat. I have a progressive wing, Josh Elliott, fighting me. It's time for me to gotta either get in the game. And I don't know what prompted him, but it gets back to what we talked about, how he does have that passion when it comes to certain issues like the Iraq War. Maybe he woke up and said, hey, I got to start talking about this like I did in 2006.
Yeah, I think both things are true.
Yeah.
Can we say that he put this in his speech if had anything to do with Josh Elliott and the progressive? Of course it did. But
well, I don't know. I'm not sure about
that. But
he
can't fake. He can't fake things.
No.
He can't fake the passion. He's not. A Gavin Newsom who can just, go into one room and sell ice to Eskimos in another
Shapiro
room. Yeah.
lighting his hair on fire all the
So,
time.
You know what? One thing I want to talk about before we close. I think one of the interesting battles, if they have it, is Governor Lamont wants to do earmark reform. The legislature does not want to do earmark reform. But in the middle of all that is the McCrory scandal, which all happened around earmarks.
Yeah.
That's going to be very interesting because
he'll get support from Republicans on that. And to your question, Tom, of where there are so many opportunities, I think, John, where Republicans will work with the governor on things that are priorities. And I think that has sort of been the hallmark, as the governor has said to Democrat colleagues, like, no, this makes sense. I go back to, and you're going to roll your eyes and laugh at me, but I always think about what would Governor Rell do in a very divided time. And she had obviously a divisive president for much of her term. I think people have an opportunity to take the high road, and the governor did not. And I think you get what you get, and you don't get upset. You get the response from people based on what you say. And yeah, the speech would have been really boring and milquetoast, but that was on their end.
Here's the question:
they could have talked about accomplishments and here's what we're going to do, and they didn't do any of that either.
A lot of politics is scripted. No kidding. If he didn't say anything about ICE,
every question would have been asked about it.
And,
all of the Democrats would have been screaming.
Would they have picked something else out to go light their hair on fire to the cameras? No. You think they would have said he did a good good job. Let's go to November.
No, because it would have been more. It would have been the sort of usual run-of-the-mill criticisms on the budget, and it would
Too
would
much
not,
spending. Where's the money
right? I mean,
coming
it
from?
would not. The reason that there was so much fire and passion was because of the way in which. And I go back to the way in which he talked
Correct.
about the ICE situation.
Tom, if he had not mentioned Minneapolis and ICE, the Democrats would have treated his speech like Larry Kafaro and I treated Jody Rell's income tax increase.
He didn't
They
have
would have
to-
been. They would have been
right.
attacking him.
It's the way in which it was done, not that it was done. I think that's important.
Yeah.
All right, guys. That'll do it for Caliper After Hours.
All right.
We'll see you guys
Republicans
next week.
only.
There you go. Next week,
People's elbow.
Democrats,
We win.
Thanks,
That's
guys.
right.
See you next week.